Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Storybound podcast. I'm very excited that you're here to join us today. On the podcast, we have Cae Hawksmoor. They are visiting us from the UK, and I'm very excited to have them on today. Cae, would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, as Tommy said, my name's Kai. I'm primarily a developmental editor, but also a writer. I've been writing ever since I could hold a pen, really. I've been a professional developmental editor for about 4 years now. In both cases, I focus mostly on speculative fiction, especially fantasy, but also sci-fi, a little bit of horror. Recently, branched out a little bit into romanticy. So long as there's kind of a fantastical element, that's my wheelhouse. I also am a survivor of complex trauma. I have anxiety and depression, various sensory issues, the other things that kind of go along with that. Maybe, possibly undiagnosed ADHD. That's one of those things that I think a lot of us are finding at the moment. You see a lot of videos about ADHD, and it's very relatable to some things that I've felt and experienced all through my life. Yeah, and that's about it, really. I've spent most of my life on or around the poverty line. And yeah, clearly that's influenced everything too.
I can relate with a lot of that. Oh, absolutely a lot of that. My journey for diagnosis started with watching videos, and I kept seeing videos on like ADHD and autism, and I was like, I don't know which one it is. It's either one of the two of these. And then I went and got diagnosed as both of them. But
Yeah.
that's where I started too. So I get it. I think a lot of us are definitely coming to these realizations older
Mm, mm.
in life.
And
I think it has to do with like the way it was diagnosed when we were children was primarily like rambunctious white males that were being diagnosed with these things. And so I think a lot of people are finding out that later in life they have it because maybe they didn't exactly fit the profile
there's
of,
quite a
what they,
lot of overlap between the symptoms of ADHD and the symptoms of complex trauma. So I saw something the other day that said, if you feel safe and you still can't do it, it's probably ADHD. I'm not at the stage yet
oh,
where I feel safe, so it's impossible for me to say whether it's one or the other.
I understand that. I'm also an abuse survivor, and I understand that it takes a lot to feel. For me, when you're saying safety or you're talking about safety at least, for me, that means feeling safe in my body
Wow.
because being, obviously I can be safe in my home, right? And I am safe in my home, but it took me a really long time to feel safe in my body and in my own mind, to trust my own brain and my own thoughts, especially after being emotionally abused and gaslit and living with things like that.
Yeah, I think we have quite a similar background, and things like that stay in the body. I can be perfectly safe in my life, but my nervous system will still react to even the smallest thing as though a tiger is actively chasing me. Right, so it's definitely what you're talking about, that felt sense of safety in yourself. Yeah,
I understand that too. I oftentimes get anxiety out of nowhere, and I tell my partner I'm feeling anxious and they're like, "What's wrong?" It's like, I don't know. My body is just it's in fight mode. It's in fight mode. Like it doesn't feel good. It's not regulated right now. And I am years and years away out from everything that happened to me. At this point, I'm 35, so let me do some math. I'm almost 15 years out from everything that happened, and I still have moments where I don't feel safe and comfy in my body. So I understand that. It's a hard thing. It's a very hard
it
thing.
is, and especially if you have developmental trauma, you never, or at least I never really learned how to be properly regulated.
Mm.
So my nervous system does not know how to feel safe up until kind of my mid to late 30s. So 5 to 10 years ago, it was like constantly just living in a state of crisis. So I think a lot of it is about learning and teaching the body a tiger is not chasing me. It is okay. We are safe. And learning that kind of thing and teaching the body that kind of thing can take decades.
I can. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you found ways to regulate your body when we haven't been taught that. What was that journey like for you? Was it watching videos? Was it therapy? What was it for you? Or was it a combination of things?
Yeah. Well, it's been a combination. I've been kind of seeking therapy and help and reading self-help books for most of my life, trying to find various solutions. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I think also quite common in people with complex trauma is I really minimized what had happened to me and kind of framed it as being normal. So, but I knew something was clearly very wrong with me, and I spent kind of a lot of my life looking for solutions for that. The turning point was really when I met my latest therapist and started working with her about 2 or 3 years ago. And really, she was the first person who met me with unconditional acceptance and kindness. And that really kind of started modeling something within myself that I could treat myself with kindness and acceptance. She taught me how to do that. I had no idea before because nobody had ever shown me those things. So really that was the key. And then since then, it's just been a matter of experimenting with things that work for me. Annoyingly, all the things that people say work do tend to work. Meditation, breathing exercises, sensory grounding, regular exercise, eating well, all of those things. But I think I was blocked from I think I was blocked from accessing those things for so long because I didn't have that place to start of inner kindness towards myself. So it
Mhm.
really took that coming about before I could start to access those things.
And you said you struggled with depression. And in my experience, the things that people say are right, that like meditation, grounding, exercise, eating right, those things do help. But in my experience, if you are struggling with depression, being able to even do those things, even though you know you should be doing them, is extremely difficult. Do you feel like your depression had any impact on getting started with those things, that maybe the fatigue from depression or your own internal like bad thoughts? Yeah. What are they called? Intrusive thoughts. Did those get in the way? Do you feel like your depression had any impact on starting that journey for
Yeah,
you?
it's huge. And I think, again, it comes down to a lack of kindness towards myself. And that for a very long time, I was caught between the complete collapse and depression of not being able to do anything at all. And this very kind of voice within me that's always pushing me and trying to make myself do things. And I would deal with depression by trying to make myself do things or feel bad about the fact that I couldn't do things. And those two things really create a whole cycle that I've been going round and round for my whole life. And it's only really since the start of this year that I've started to unwind that a little bit. And now I'm actually in the middle of a horrific spell of depression at the moment. And it is just about learning new techniques and trying new things. We're just trying to be kind to myself and accept that. And again, because of the complex trauma, my nervous system reads it as a threat. So if I'm depressed and I have all of these big overwhelming feelings, that's a threat and I'm in danger. And it just makes the whole thing worse. So really, yeah, it does uh, come down to giving myself a break and knowing where that line is between I need to try and do these things because I know they help, but I also need to cut myself some slack because if I let that critical, judgmental, pushy, nasty voice start to gain sway, it will make everything worse. So I don't know if that
I
answers
have
your
that.
question.
It does. No, it does. Because I have the same experience. I get stuck in the should trap. I should do this. I should do that. I should be walking. I should be eating well. I should. And it is laden with so much guilt. And
Yeah.
I end up guilting myself. And that keeps me in this sort of like shame loop and doesn't help me come out of my depression. So I definitely understand that is my experience too.
Mhm.
And I do agree that being kind to yourself is probably the biggest gift that you can give yourself. I talk about it a lot on this podcast that we should all be giving ourselves grace, and that is kindness. We should be giving ourselves the permission to have low days and slow days and days where we're not doing all the things because we are human and perfection is not required, right? It's not required. And I think a lot of us get stuck in that, like I should,
Yeah, and I think it drives
unfortunately.
the whole cycle of everything else because really it's just a cycle of, for me anyway, it's a cycle of hating on myself and putting myself down and telling myself that I'm a terrible person. And that's the cause of all of these other things. That's the cause of the lack of safety in my nervous system, the depression, the anxiety, everything else that's going on. Whereas when, and I can't always, but when I can find ways to treat myself with kindness and cut myself some slack and not be so demanding, it does help. And on the days when I can't be kind to myself, just try and accept that is also part of the process and be kind to myself to the fact that I can't be kind to myself. Because otherwise you can turn, or I can anyway, turn my lack of ability to be kind to myself into something else that I'm beating myself up because that pathway is very well worn in my brain. It's very easy to fall into the habits. But yeah, it's really undoing the programming of a whole lifetime.
It takes time to build kind of new pathways in our brains. It's definitely possible on a scientific level to do it, but it takes time. So it's not going to unfortunately happen overnight as much as we would love it to. It
Mm.
just, it's not the case. So through all of this, everything that you've been through, everything that you're still dealing with, what are you using to cope or what is keeping you going on a day-to-day basis?
Nature is a huge source of solace. The natural world and animals have always been hugely important and very comforting and matter an awful lot to me. I'm also quite a spiritual person and making the time for that aspect of my life. And in fact, both of those things, the natural world and kind of more spiritual matters, are things that I get very easily pushed to the side. That's also something I'm actively working on right now because when I start pushing those things to the side that help and that keep me going, that's when everything starts to spiral. So yeah, a lot of the work is about trying to prioritize those things, even when everything in my head is screaming that I don't have the time, I don't have the space, etc.
I find nature really calming also, but it's also one of those things that it's hard to get out and be in nature when your brain is not being your friend, you know? And I can definitely tell you kind of have the influence around in your home. You have all your little plants and stuff. You can't see mine in my video, but I do have plants too. I have a plant off to my left. I have actually a plant right behind my head. There you go. There's my little snake plant. Here's one up on my bookshelf here. So I do try to bring the outdoors inside because I do find it to be very helpful. And it does make me feel better because I can't always get outside. There's just days where my body is like, nope, it's not happening. Not happening at all. So I know that you're also a writer. Do you feel that your writing has been any sort of outlet for you and everything that you've experienced? Does creating kind of help lighten your burden or give you something constructive to do with everything?
Used to, back when I started writing, it was a huge kind of escape. And a lot of ways, stories kept me alive for a very long time. Unfortunately, once I started having a little bit of success and getting some publishing credentials and things like that, started getting story acceptances, I started putting a lot of pressure on myself. I started comparing what I was doing to what I'd done in the past. I started worrying about what I was writing now not being as accepted or as good. I started getting very caught up in the way that I should and shouldn't be writing. And it kind of, and I was very hard on myself for a very long time about it. We're talking probably over a decade. And it really kind of wrecked my relationship with my creativity. So it is still an outlet in that parts of me will always go into the stories that I write and help me explore those ideas and work through them. And I'm kind of working on finding my way back to to a more balanced and healthy relationship with creativity now and writing for myself a little bit more. That's the kind of thing that took years and years to break, and it's going to take years and years to repair that. But definitely it's how I got into writing in the first place was as a refuge.
Think a lot of writers get into writing for that reason too. We use it as our escape, and it typically starts through books. We start reading as youngsters, and that is our escape in maybe tumultuous childhoods. And then you see what the written word can do and help and make us feel. And so we want to also write because we want to help other people feel good. I feel like, in a way, like part of my writing is the fact that I know the way books make me feel. They make me feel seen and heard and understood, and they also give me that escape, and it's I wanna provide that to other people. So I think a lot of us get started in that way, but I wanna circle back to this, like, comparison thing where you were talking about it's kinda made things difficult for you, kind of taken away some of that escape for you, and I think a lot of writers also get stuck in that, the comparison game. I've had to be very careful myself about what I interact with online and who I'm following because I do get stuck in that comparison trap, and it does hinder me, and I'm very aware of it. So I understand where you're coming from there. And I think a lot of creatives, not just writers, so whether you're a painter or you draw, you're an illustrator or you're a musician, then we're constantly looking at our peers and being like, oh, I could be so much better. I could do this better. I could do that better. And
Mm.
I think our biggest thing that we need to be doing is I think we need to do our best to not compare. I understand that it's difficult not to, though, because I do it too. So you're not alone, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think a big part of my work as an editor is to try and get that message across to other writers. And it becomes difficult once something becomes your job. I write professionally now, so writing is, in a lot of ways, my job. And whenever anything becomes a profession and or a source of income like that, it becomes difficult to, it's never going to be exactly the same as it was when I was writing for myself because there are outside demands on how I need to construct stories and what the aims of it are. So a big part of what I do as an editor is kind of talking to writers about knowing what it is that you're writing for and who it is that you're writing for, and finding ways to maintain your relationship with your own creativity so you don't end up really horrifically burned out and unable to access that.
I've heard through discussion online, I've heard that from professional authors that once your writing becomes your full-time day job, that you really have to have hobbies outside of writing because writing is no longer your hobby once it's your
Yeah, I
full-time
agree.
day job.
I
Well,
agree.
ha-
Absolutely.
And is that why you're doing editing, or is it just because it goes hand in hand with your writing? What, because if you're writing for your writing, if that's your job, but you're also doing developmental editing, what took you over to the editing side?
Uh, to be honest, I got into editing because it is extremely difficult to make a living from writing. I don't have it in me to be a self-published author, all of the marketing and stuff. I'm getting better at it. Ironically, as I work as an editor, I'm getting better at it. So for me, it was always going to be traditional publication. It is extraordinarily difficult to make a living in traditional publication. So I got into a lot of the world around writing. I did a lot of rewriting stuff. I considered ghostwriting, writing articles, all of these different things, and eventually settled into developmental editing because yeah, kind of in all of the years that I've been writing, I've learned an awful lot about story, and it's wonderful to be able to use that to help other writers to refine their books, refine their stories, and pursue their own dreams.
I love that. I love that. I thought about getting into editing myself, but I don't think I have the eye for it. I've gotten better at it. I feel like editing, just like writing, is a skill. It's something that you learn as you go, as you critique and you're in writing groups and you have writing partners. It's something that you get better at as you do. I didn't start really taking writing, even though I've written my whole life. I'm a certified English teacher, so I'm pretty good with
Mm.
the English language, but that's different when you're sitting down to write things for publication. It's kind of
Mm.
a different skill set. There's a lot, especially novel versus academic versus things that are going on Medium or Substack. Like they're all different versions and they all have different rules and frameworks
Mm.
and things like that. And so you have to learn a lot. So when I was teaching myself how to learn books, I really didn't know how to write a book. And it took me, I just finished writing my third book. And I feel like I'm finally getting a decent grip on like how to do this thing and how to edit because I've edited 3 books at this point. And so you really learn a lot through that.
It's all about where your own skill set is, because I definitely do not have the eye for line or copy editing. My approach to grammar and spelling is I slap down at best. If you read it in my own work, it's full of sentence fragments. It's all over the place because to me, the only thing that matters is whether the reader understands what I'm saying. And if the reader
Totally.
understands what I'm saying, then perfect. But with developmental editing, yeah, I've read stories all of my life. And then I was lucky enough to go to Clarion West and learn so much about how stories are structured and put together. And yeah, I suppose for me, it's more of an instinctual thing. When I'm reading a story, sometimes I've got a sense that something's not quite working and I feel it more in my body first. And then it's a case of what is it that's out of place here? And how could we go about addressing it?
I want to dive into that. You said you went to Clarion West. How did that happen? How did that come up?
I'd been writing professionally since about well, I've been writing for years and years before that, but it was only kind of around 2012 I started submitting things to short fiction, short speculative fiction magazines. I'd had a few publication credits and I had friends who were in the speculative fiction writing world. So I knew about Clarion West. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a 6-week intensive writing workshop that takes place in Seattle, and you live in the same house with, I think it's 16, it could be 18, who's other writers, and you have a different tutor every week who's either a speculative fiction writer or editor or publisher. And yeah, you write stories every week. So I was aware of it, and I'd had friends who'd applied, and I had a friend who'd went. And I thought, what's the harm? Or I put in an application and I was lucky enough to get in on a full scholarship and I crowdfunded my plane tickets. And in the end, I had to quit my job to go because they were difficult about it. And yeah, so really, I dropped everything and went over to Seattle. It was my first time out of the UK since I was a teenager. And yeah, stayed there for 6 weeks and we learned from Elizabeth Bear and N.K. Jemisin and all of these incredible writers. And it did more to teach me about writing in those 6 weeks than I had done in the 30 plus years of my life beforehand. It was absolute game changer.
That sounds really transformative. I've never known anyone who's actually gone. It seems like such like something that's in like the upper echelons, like high tier writing. It's kind of like doing like those really like an MFA program or something like that, but condensed.
Right. So it's an astonishing opportunity. And one of the things I hadn't realized before I went, but that is unfortunately very true, is how much of publishing is based on networking and who you know, especially traditional publishing is based on who you know. So when you go to somewhere like Clarion West, that whole kind of ecosystem around speculative fiction publishing, all of the agents and publishers, everybody's there and you get to talk to them and share a drink with them and shake their hands. And it opened so many doors, and that's even how I got into editing, because once I graduated from Clarion West, one of the other alumni offered me a job doing rewrites and editing for a company that publishes novels and graphic novels. I did that for a number of years, and yeah, so it opened so many doors. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I can highly recommend to anybody who's thinking about applying to give it a go.
Would you have any recommendations for people who, like ourselves, could be mentally ill, neurodivergent, on the poverty line, that sort of thing, that may not have these opportunities for networking? Because that's definitely something that I struggle with is I'm a one-car household. Like, how do I get to a Wednesday writing group in the evenings when my partner works evenings? So it's being on the poverty line is a barrier. Also, being autistic and not having a high battery for social interactions is also challenging because I have to be very selective about how often and when I'm putting myself out there. So do you have any sort of, again, recommendations or thoughts around that?
Can be. The first thing I'd say is it is incredibly tough out there, no matter what route you pursue or how many opportunities you have. It's always going to be easier for somebody who, if I could be flying over to Seattle for the reunion every year and renewing all of these relationships that I made when I went in 2016, it would be a huge help to me. But there's no one thing that is an absolute must. There are so many different ways into writing, and I think it's very different whether you're considering traditional publication or whether you're going to go indie, because indie writers really don't need to worry about any of that so much. All they need to do is tell their story to the best of their ability and get it to their readers. So they don't need to worry about anything outside of that. With traditional publishing, there are lots of different ways in submitting stories to, if you have short fiction magazines, like for me, it was Beneath the Skies and Interzone and all these kind of like pro-rate or semi-pro-rate paying speculative fiction magazines. You start to build a platform and people start to know who you are. I mean, there's so, a large number of different like opportunities for people who have various different obstacles in their path. Like I said, Clarion West gave me a full scholarship, and the whole ecosystem around Clarion West paid for my train tickets to get me over there, which was huge. I've just done I don't even know what you'd call it. They opened applications to speculative fiction novels. They're giving out workshops from agents and editors on how to get your book published. A bunch of the applications went forward into future rounds to talk to their agents and publishers. There are grants. I've never really had any luck with those. They tend to want people who are already proven quantities, which to me is quite frustrating. But there are a variety of different opportunities. And really, if you're seeking traditional publication, all you need to do is convince the right agent to take you on and convince the right publisher to take you on. So things like networking, etc., can be a help. But it's not the only way. There are a variety of different ways, and then there are a variety of different resources and opportunities that are open. So I guess if I have any advice, it's get involved in the community for whatever genre that you're writing in, and keep your eyes open for opportunities like that, because they do come along. And when they do, if you're able to, then seize them with both hands. I was very lucky in being able to go to Clarion West because I don't have anyone who's depending on me. I was able to just quit my job, and it was a huge risk. And all kinds of things could have gone terribly wrong, but I don't have kids. I don't have anybody dependent on me. So I was able to do that. But there are lots of opportunities out there. So if you feel like you can, then keep your ear close to the ground, get to know your community and look out for them.
I agree. I think so many people don't realize that there are so many opportunities out there, not just for writers. Obviously, writing is what I know about, but there's a lot out there for creatives of all different industries. But I know for me, I've taken advantage of those things. So I know last year I applied for a scholarship to attend a writing conference within my state so I could attend. So that was great because I couldn't afford the ticket otherwise. I applied to a scholarship to another writing program and I got that. And it was like a short little like class thing. But you have to know to look for those things. I think that's part of the challenge is people don't know that they exist. And sometimes you have to really dig for them. So it does take energy and effort to do those things. So when you're suffering from like depression, things like that, it can make it difficult to even have the brain space to do that. But they are out there. And I definitely encourage everyone to kind of check out their local chapter of writing. I know for me, I have the NC Writers Network for North Carolina in the state that I live in. They do offer scholarships to their conferences. I think there is a big writing conference here in the United States. It's like a big national one. I forget the name. I'll have to Google it, but it's a big one. And they do volunteer. If you volunteer to work for like a 4-hour shift during the 4-day conference, you get your several $100 ticket for free. And a lot of people don't know that's an option. And I signed up for that and I got that too. I didn't end up going to the conference because I couldn't afford the plane tickets. Those are things that are available. You just have to know to look for them and to ask for them.
I was going to say, I'm a member of a newsletter from a writer called, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Fran Meads Williams. And I think she does a weekly newsletter that is mostly about freelance writing opportunities, so article writing, newspaper writing opportunities. But she does also include grants and writing prizes and competitions and other opportunities. And you do sometimes see a lot of things pop up that are only open to people from various disadvantaged backgrounds, that are only open to people of color or trans people, non-binary people. Yeah, I can highly recommend that newsletter as well.
If you wouldn't mind sending that to me, and that way I can include it in the show notes. I'm also going to go ahead and I'll include some other resources that I am aware of. Like I know that there is a speculative writers grant. It's not for very much, but it's $1,000. And I know that is actually opening.
Mm.
I think it just opened in the beginning of September. So I'll include that too. Just
Nice.
provide some resources from people in the show notes. So,
Mhm.
Kai, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated through all of this, all the difficult, the hard, the challenging? Is it paying the bills? Is it your passion for it? What is it?
We're stubbornness an appropriate answer? I feel like I get through quite a lot on stubbornness and bloody mindedness and just inability to quit. I feel like that's kind of got me where I am now in terms of healing as well as in terms of writing. Is I just kind of don't know how to quit. It's just getting there, even when things are overwhelming. I have quite a pessimistic view of the world in a lot of ways. We've talked a little bit about community, and I know that can be an absolute game changer for a lot of people who have anxiety or depression or trauma. For me, my own journey has been about learning to do a lot of this stuff on my own, because my relationships with other people quite often don't go well. I don't know what it is about me, or whether it's probably trauma reactions, but also my mental health issues. Oh, I'm just really antisocial. It doesn't help much either. So yeah, a lot of it's just been about kind of being too stubborn to quit and taking some satisfaction in what I've been able to achieve just by being determined. And like we were saying earlier, nature is a huge comfort and source of inspiration. I've got two cats. I love them very much. I have my partner, and she and I have been through, both of us, to hell and back, really. But yeah, I suppose it really is just bloody mindedness that keeps me going. This might
That's
not be a
fair.
typical answer, but it's mine.
No, that is fair. It's absolutely fair. I would say my persistence is probably, I wouldn't say it's unmatched. Like, I think you have to be persistent to be a writer, but I feel like there's a level of grit. Once you decide that you like want to be an author or writer for a living, there's a level of grit there that is just, I feel like, unmatched by the general public because we face rejection on a daily basis. We're told constantly that our writing's not good enough or it doesn't make the cut or for whatever reason it's not a fit. All these different things, and that can be really discouraging. You have to build up this really thick skin, and so I do appreciate the level of persistence that you have to have. I sometimes
Or
just keep going out of spite. That's just I know that sounds terrible.
valid.
I'm
No,
like
it's completely valid.
I keep going just out of spite, it's like
Yep.
my big fuck you to the world. Like, I'm
Yeah,
going to do
exactly.
this. I like it no matter how many times you tell me no. And I may have days where I'm crying and I'm bawling and I hate the world and I hate the industry. But I get up the next day and I keep writing because again,
Mm.
I'm doing it out of spite. Like it's just no one's gonna tell me no.
And that kind of spite is a huge motivator, because anger, which I guess is where spite comes from, it gets shit done. And it's a great antidote to depression in that, because depression really doesn't want to get anything done. Sometimes you got to let that happen, but it can be spiteful and even like proud of yourself for your ability to be spiteful. I think that's incredible, and it can get you a really long way.
I do agree. I do agree. I think that's kind of what's gotten me out of my depression a little bit it's there's definitely been a layer. of spite in there. Like, there was a big period in my writing life where I didn't write nearly a year, and I got back into it after being told no and all of these things and a couple of rejections in my personal life and in my friendships. And I got back to writing because I was like, I'm doing this damn thing. I don't care what anyone says. I'm doing this. And then since I started writing again in the year I started writing again, I've written 2 books. So it's,
I love that.
spite.
Absolutely love
And
that.
that
Awesome.
uh, a spite will get you a long way. And I'm
Wow.
actually I've come out of my depression quite a bit. And since probably this spring, I was really struggling with my depression the last 2, 3, probably longer than that. I say 2, 3 years, but it's been a dark cloud over me for probably about 5. But it was 2, 3 years ago is when it reached a head that it was like making an impact in my life.
Mm.
But it's really actually helped because I'm proud of myself, and having pride in things that you're doing really helps kind of tamp down that depression. Because when you're prideful and you feel good about things that you're accomplishing, it overshadows like all those negative thoughts that you have
Yeah.
about yourself and those shame spirals and things like that.
Mhm.
So
I
it's
think
valid.
no, it's absolutely right. I absolutely agree with you, and I absolutely love that. I think it's awesome that you managed to, because I think when you can't access anything else in yourself, when you're completely kind of at your rock bottom, spite is sometimes like it's the only thing you've got, and it's a
Mhm.
lifesaver in that respect.
It is. That's it.
It really
Spite
is. And
probably is what got me. It's the same thing that got me out of my abusive relationships. It's the same thing that kept me going then. I've
Mhm.
reached for it in my darkest times.
I think it can be an incredible and a powerful force in our lives. We were talking about rejections and how much resistance we have to have as writers. I just wanted to say that people talk about having to deal with rejections from agents or publishers, and that's definitely part of it. But also, once you kind of quote unquote make it, it doesn't really get any easier because at the moment I'm writing this, I'm under commission to write an interactive novel, and I'm sending off chapters that have taken me 6, 7, 8, 2 months to write. Sometimes they're hundreds of thousands of words long because there's so many different paths the player can take. And I get an email back a few weeks later that's like, this is okay. Please find attached a document of 3 pages of things we'd like changing and changing. So it can be absolutely thankless. And you need that kind of just, okay, I guess we're sticking in here and we're doing that then. Because there's no other way, really. The writing industry is brutal like that. It doesn't really care about your feelings.
It does not one bit. But I love that you brought up this project that you're working on. I'd love to hear more about it. I don't think I've heard of interactive novels in thought and idea as a writer. Obviously, I read, what was it when I was a kid? I read,
Choose your own adventure books.
yeah, I think like there's Goosebumps books that were like interactive. If you go this way, this happens. You go that way, this happens. Jump to this page. But I have not seen them since I was a child, and I devoured them as a kid. But you said you're working on one now. What does that look like? What is it?
Well, I'm writing for a company called Choice of Games. I'm commissioned to write a game for them, and that's really all they do is these text-based interactive novels where, yeah, you build a character and that they have kind of strengths and weaknesses. There's tests that you can either succeed or fail at. Yeah, and it really is it's just like being the protagonist of your own book, which is why I've enjoyed playing them so much and kind of why I'm getting such a kick out of writing one is the idea that I could do that for somebody else. You were saying earlier that part of what drives you to write is the idea of being a sanctuary, writing stories that are a sanctuary for other people who are stuck in the same kind of stuff that you were stuck in. And that's what this kind of does for me. Is I've always kind of really connected with interactive stories. I come from a tabletop role playing background, been doing that since I was a teenager, 13, 14. So the idea of actually being part of a story and having my own characters, almost like being able to escape my own identity in a way and be somebody else for a bit was astonishingly freeing. So it's wonderful to write this game. It's kind of dark fantasy, the one that I'm writing. It's sort of if Dragon Age meets Skyrim meets The Witch. Hopefully, it's going to be out sometime next year. There's armies of the dead and apocalypses, there's romance, there's all different sorts of shows. And it's all kind of set in this frozen wasteland. And it's been really fun. And I was commissioned to write a dark fantasy game, and every chapter I feel like I make it a little bit more horrifying and darker and nastier. And I send it off to my editor thinking, this is going to be the time she comes back to me and says, "Hi, what's wrong with you? What's too much? Calm down a little bit. Can we wind this back in?" And every time she goes, "No, this is great. Keep it coming." So I'm like, well, okay, then you asked for horrific winter zombies. So I guess I'm giving you to that to the best of my abilities. Yes, it's been quite fun kind of to push the boundaries of what I felt were acceptable and to find that actually it's been really well received and to just keep going and making it more and more kind of horrific. Yeah, and balancing that with hope, which has always kind of been big for me as a writer, and that life can be overwhelming and awful and the whole world can be collapsing around you, but there are still things that make that life worth living. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I think that's what people love about those things though, right? I played Dragon Age. I haven't read The Witcher, but I watched the TV shows. Never played Skyrim. Definitely is in my wheelhouse. It's definitely something I've always wanted to try, never gave it a try. But I do think that there's a market for that, like the pieces of darkness, right? With those that inkling of hope. Like there's always hope at the end. And you see that in Dragon Age, you see that in The Witcher, these dark themes. And I do think people there is a genre and there is a market for that. And I'm definitely in that market. So when do you think this is gonna come out? When do you think people can get their hands on it?
Sometime next year might be. It depends really on how long playtesting takes and how long we have to refine the game after I finish writing it. We have two full chapters and an epilogue left to write. They'll probably be done in the early part of next year. Then it will be playtesting, so again, probably towards the end of next year, if not the beginning of the one after.
That's a really long timeline. That's something about traditional publishing that really blows my mind is that extended timeline. Does that feel weird at all? Because I've never been published, period. I'm still trying to figure out my journey and whether it's indie or traditional. And what does that feel like you? Because let's say you finish a project in 2024 and it doesn't come out till 2026. Do you when it comes out finally 2 years later, do you feel, I would have to imagine you feel detached from it because you're probably moved on to the next project by then, right?
And this was really the first kind of huge project that I've worked on that's going to have that delay. And in this case, it's mostly because of the sheer scale of the game. It's probably going to be somewhere between 750,000 and a million words when it's finished. So the actual kind of play testing and publishing gap isn't going to be that long at all. But definitely, the gap between finishing a traditional novel and that coming out can be a gap of several years. And some writers do definitely struggle with it. The advice that I think is best, I can't remember who, it was one of my Clarion West tutors that said it, I can't remember who, was to just keep writing and to keep writing different things. Because if you get too invested in one world or one story or one series in traditional publishing, the landscape can change. It can take years before it comes out, or a series can get cancelled partway through and you can end up stuck. So the best thing is to always be looking forward and working on something new and working on the next thing and preserve momentum that way.
I agree with that. I would say moving forward and just continuing onward is kind of what's kept me going because I have two books right now that I've been querying. One I queried a little bit and I kind of shelved it. And 2 years later, I'm like, I barely queried this thing. Let me re-edit it and let me put it back out there. But I've also, since that time, I've written two more books. I think moving forward is definitely what keeps me going. Like I'm just always working on the next project. Because I feel like if I look back too long, I'll get stuck. I'll get stuck in the pile of rejections. I'll get stuck in the self-pity. I'll get stuck in all of that stuff. So I just keep moving forward, I wrote this, I send it out into the world to a handful of people. If they say no, okay, if they say no, that's fine because I'm working on the next thing. I don't really care at this point. Like it just,
It's a really great way to be because, yeah, but if you don't, you can get bogged down. And once that process starts happening, you can almost get crushed underneath it. So, yeah, I think like always looking towards the next thing. And I imagine, I've not been in that position myself yet, but I imagine it must feel very weird to have a book that you finished 6, 7+ years ago suddenly come out and everybody's wild about it. But I guess just for me as a writer, I'm quite used to jumping between different projects and ideas and worlds and genres and all and stories and all of that. That would definitely help.
what about for you? What's next for you, Kai? What is the year goal, 3-year goal? You're working on this interactive game. What's next for you?
But this game finished, definitely. It's been an astonishing amount of work and it's been very difficult to keep myself out of burnout while working on it and also kind of holding down my editing work. So definitely learning how to look after myself better in this crazy world of writing that we exist in, where it can be so demanding and I can push myself so hard, trying to look after myself better. I tend not to think too far ahead. I do have a novel of my own that I've been working on since really 2019, and I would love to, when the game's finished, go back to that. And it's probably going to need a big rewrite and get that ready for querying. In my editing, with my editing hat on, I'd really love to do more courses, try and make developmental editing a little bit more accessible to people who can't necessarily afford to take on an editor. It can be extremely expensive. You're paying for 3, 4+ weeks of our time. So it can be hugely expensive to employ an editor. I'd love to do courses on how to be your own developmental editor and make those a little bit more accessible to people. And again, that's something that's going to have to wait until after the game is over.
We all have only so much bandwidth, right? So we have to pick and choose what we're doing, unfortunately. And I have that same problem because there's a million things I want to be doing, but I really only have the bandwidth for one thing at a time since I have my day job and all of that. So I understand. I definitely do. So we've talked a lot about like struggles for people who are trauma survivors, people who are struggling with depression, anxiety, dysregulated nervous systems, all of that. Do you have anything you would like to share with our listeners? Any sort of advice or message that you would like to give them?
It's tough because everybody's different. And I guess that's the only thing I'd say is find your own path, find the things that work for you and persist in them. And accept that it's not an easy world out there. The publishing or writing world is brutal and cutthroat and almost impossible to make a living in, especially if you're dealing with other obstacles. The world in general is extremely difficult to live in. And I think the only way you can do that is by knowing what your own path is and exploring that. For me, I suppose things really started to change when I, instead of fighting depression, really kind of sank down into it and went in search of kind of what's at the bottom of it. And that really doesn't work for some people, but it really worked for me. Yes, it's just about find the things that work for you, trust your own instincts and follow your own path as best you can because nobody else is going to ever do that for you. Unfortunately, nobody is ever going to make you a priority. I think it's a very difficult thing to let go of. I read something the other day that said, aside from the fear of dying and the wish for eternal life, the dream that's hardest for people to let go of is that somebody else will come along and save us or fix us, especially for people who have complex trauma. There's a time in our life when somebody else should have been there to give us these unconditional love and acceptance and didn't. But the injustice of that doesn't change the reality of the fact that nobody else will do those things for you now. You have to really do them for yourself. So don't listen to anybody else's idea of what you should and shouldn't be doing and how you should and shouldn't be healing. Just find the things that work for you and embrace them.
I think that's really good advice, to be honest. I think it's very good advice. We're all different. We're all different creatures. And I especially love the part where you mentioned no one else is gonna come and save us. We have to save ourselves. And I know a hard thing to wrap our heads around, especially like you said, for those of us with trauma, especially as children. Other people should have been saving us and protecting us, and we had to still then be our own protectors. That can be tough. It definitely can be tough. And I am with you. I encourage everyone to try all the things
Yeah.
and find what helps them because we're all different and there's no right way, no wrong way. Yeah, I agree. Kai, do you mind sharing where listeners can find you and find your work? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, of course. I'm mostly on Threads. Spend far too much time on Threads.
Do.
I'm at Cae Hawksmoor edits on there, and I post on them every day. Wonderful writing community on Threads. So you can find me there, and my writing is in a variety of magazines. They're all listed on my website, as well as more information about my editing services. That's caehawksmoor.com. I'll send you the link. Want to pop that in the show notes. Yeah, and
Yep.
it's really just those two places. That's more than enough for an introvert like me to be on the internet. Just those two.
I agree. I agree. I cannot keep up with all the platforms, unfortunately. I spend most of my time on either Threads or TikTok. That's kind of my two comfy
On
places.
TikTok.
Yeah. TikTok, I have a love-hate relationship with TikTok, but Threads is where I'm most comfy. But I think most writers, I feel like a lot of writers are finding Threads to be a comfy place because it's text-based. That's what
Mhm.
we're good at. Like words are
Yeah,
our thing
exactly.
anyway.
Yeah.
So I
Unlike
totally
a
get
lot of
that.
people beforehand telling me how brilliant Instagram was, and that's just not for me because I have to remember to take photos. I have to look at my own face, maybe. Yeah, that's just not for me. But Threads has been a game changer.
I agree. I'm totally with you there. Last question. What's something our listeners might not know about you, especially for people who already do follow you on Threads? What is something that maybe doesn't come up so much when especially if we're on Threads and we're always talking about writing or we're talking about our depression or neurodivergence, whatever it is? What is something people wouldn't know about you?
Well, I think I have mentioned it on there once, but it was only once, and it was very in the early days of Threads. But I'm qualified carriage groom, so I'm qualified to work with horses and carriages and tack up horses and get them ready to pull a carriage and assist the carriage driver. I got that qualification a few years ago now. Yeah, and I don't think that's something many people know about me.
No, that's really cool. That's never something I've ever heard in my life. So that's very cool. And
Very
if
neat.
anyone,
Yeah.
if it is very niche, it is very, very niche. If anyone wants to find Kai and wants to talk to them, you can go find them. I'll include all their details in the show notes so you can do that. I want to thank Kai for being here. I do appreciate you and having this conversation with me. I also want to thank the listeners for being here and following along with us. All the resources we talked about will be in the show notes. Find them below and take a look. And again, thanks for being here, everyone. Appreciate all of you.